Baal. Baal was the chief god of the Canaanites and Phoenicians, widely recognized as a storm, fertility, and agricultural deity. His name means Lord or Master in West Semitic languages, which reflects his role as a dominant figure in pagan worship. In the Bible, Baal becomes the ultimate symbol of idolatry, drawing Israel's devotion away from Yahweh. His cult was promoted heavily by King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who imported Phoenician worship practices into Israel and institutionalized them. This created direct conflict with the prophets of Yahweh, most famously Elijah. On Mount Carmel, Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal to prove their God's reality by calling down fire upon their sacrifice. Despite their frantic prayers and rituals, Baal remained silent. By contrast, Yahweh sent fire from heaven instantly, consuming the sacrifice, altar, and even the water surrounding it. This account underscored Baal's impotence compared to the living God. Archaeological discoveries confirm Baal worship through inscriptions and altars. Images often portray him as a warrior god holding a lightning bolt, symbolizing his supposed control over storms. His cult included fertility rituals, sexual immorality, and sometimes even human sacrifice. Baal's worship repeatedly enticed Israel into covenant-breaking sin, making him one of the most dangerous and condemned false gods in the Old Testament. Asherah. Asherah was a major fertility goddess in Canaanite religion, described in ancient Ugaritic texts as the consort of El, the chief god in their pantheon. She was considered the mother of the gods and often connected to both fertility of the land and the sea. In some Israelite communities, Asherah was wrongly regarded as a consort to Yahweh, a belief that the prophets fiercely opposed as blasphemous. Her worship often centered around Asherah poles, wooden symbols erected on high places or beside altars. These poles became centers of idolatrous activity involving ritual prostitution and fertility rites. Reforming kings like Josiah later tore them down to restore proper worship of Yahweh. Archaeological inscriptions have even been found pairing the words Yahweh and his Asherah, showing that many Israelites fell into syncretism, blending devotion to the true God with pagan practices. The Bible repeatedly rebukes the people for turning to Asherah, calling it spiritual adultery. She became a symbol of the constant temptation for Israel to compromise, mixing the holiness of God with the immorality of pagan culture. Molech. Molech, also called Moloch or Malik, was one of the most abominable gods mentioned in Scripture. He was worshipped primarily by the Ammonites, but his cult spread into Israel. Molech is infamous for requiring child sacrifice, a practice strictly forbidden by Yahweh. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 21 and chapter 20 verses 2 through 5 explicitly prohibit giving children to Molech, attaching the death penalty to anyone who participated. The rituals likely involved heating a hollow bronze statue of Molech until it glowed red hot, then placing infants into its outstretched arms, burning them alive. This horrifying practice is confirmed by parallel accounts from Greek and Roman writers who describe similar rituals in Carthage. Tragically, even King Solomon, under the influence of his foreign wives, built a high place for Molech near Jerusalem, an act later condemned by prophets and historians. The Valley of Hinnom, south of Jerusalem, became notorious as the center of Molech worship. In later Jewish thought, this valley, called Gehenna, came to symbolize hell itself. Molech thus represents the extreme depravity of idolatry, a religion that demanded the destruction of innocent life in the name of devotion. Chemosh. Chemosh was the national god of the Moabites, often depicted as a war deity who determined military victory or defeat. Much like Yahweh's role as the covenant god of Israel, Chemosh was seen as Moab's divine protector and source of power. In 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 7, Solomon, again influenced by his foreign wives, built a high place for Chemosh on a hill east of Jerusalem, an act that provoked the Lord's anger. Archaeological evidence confirms Chemosh's importance. The Moabite stone, also called the Mesha Stele, discovered in the 19th century, dates back to the 9th century before Christ. It records King Mesha of Moab attributing his nation's victories and defeats directly to Chemosh's favor or wrath. This aligns with the biblical narrative, which repeatedly depicts Chemosh as central to Moabite worship. Prophets condemned Chemosh as a rival to Yahweh, and King Josiah later destroyed his shrines in his sweeping religious reforms. Chemosh became not just a foreign god, but also a symbol of Israel's dangerous alliances and their tendency to adopt the gods of neighboring nations. Dagon. Dagon was the principal god of the Philistines, often associated with grain and fertility, though some traditions also link him to the sea. In Judges chapter 16, the Philistines gathered in his temple to celebrate Samson's capture, praising Dagon for delivering their enemy into their hands. However, Samson prayed to Yahweh for strength and then brought down the pillars of Dagon's temple, killing himself and thousands of Philistines. This dramatic act became a symbol of Yahweh's triumph over Dagon. In 1 Samuel chapter 5, when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, they placed it in Dagon's temple in Ashdod as a sign of victory. The next morning, however, Dagon's statue was found face down before the ark. After being set upright, it fell again the following day, this time shattered, with its head and hands broken off. This event demonstrated God's supremacy over Dagon and the futility of idols before the living God. Dagon's humiliation in Scripture highlights the theme that false gods, no matter how revered by nations, cannot stand before Yahweh's power and glory. Astarte. Astarte, also called Ashtoreth in the Bible, was a prominent goddess of fertility, sexuality, and war. She was closely related to the Babylonian goddess Ishtar and the Sumerian goddess Inanna, both of whom represented love and power but were also feared as destructive forces in battle. In Canaanite and Phoenician tradition, Astarte was often linked with Baal as his consort, creating a powerful pair that dominated much of pagan worship. King Solomon, influenced by his many foreign wives, permitted the worship of Ashtoreth within Israel. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 5 records his apostasy, marking this act as one of the chief reasons for God's judgment against him and the eventual division of the kingdom. The Bible consistently condemns Israel for forsaking Yahweh to follow Baal and Ashtoreth, as seen in Judges chapter 2 verse 13. Her worship often included ritual prostitution, fertility ceremonies, and sexual immorality, directly opposing the holiness demanded by Mosaic law. Archaeological evidence, such as figurines and inscriptions, depicts her adorned with symbols of the moon, stars, and horns, sometimes shown with weapons that highlight her role as a goddess of war. In biblical theology, Astarte represents one of the most enduring seductions that repeatedly lured Israel into idolatry and covenant unfaithfulness. Bel and Nebo. Bel and Nebo were chief deities of Babylon, each symbolizing the empire's religious and political might. Bel, a title meaning Lord, was often applied to Marduk, Babylon's supreme god. Marduk was considered the creator of the universe and patron of the great city of Babylon, embodying its military strength and cultural dominance. His great temple, Esagila, stood as a monument to his worship and to the power of the Babylonian Empire. Nebo, also called Nabu in Babylonian texts, was the god of wisdom, writing, and destiny. He was often depicted holding a stylus, symbolizing his role as the scribe of the gods and the one who inscribed human fate. Nebo was closely associated with the city of Borsippa, where his temple was a center of scribal training and religious devotion. Kings of Babylon often credited Nebo with granting them wisdom to rule and record their reigns. Isaiah chapter 46 verse 1 mocks both Bel and Nebo, declaring that they bow down and stoop low, showing that even the greatest gods of Babylon would collapse under Yahweh's judgment. Their eventual downfall was fulfilled when Persia conquered Babylon in the year 539 before Christ, proving that idols, no matter how exalted by nations, cannot save or endure against the true God. Divine Council beings. The Bible contains intriguing references to Yahweh presiding over a heavenly divine council, an assembly of spiritual beings often called the sons of God, or in certain contexts, even gods. Psalm 82 verse 1 states, God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. In this passage, the word Elohim is used both for Yahweh and for the other spiritual beings under his authority. These figures are rebuked for their injustice and told that they will die like mortals, highlighting their subordination. In Job chapter 1 verse 6, the sons of God are described as gathering before the Lord, with Satan among them, reflecting a heavenly court where decisions are made concerning humanity. This image parallels council scenes in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, yet the Bible presents Yahweh as the undisputed ruler, unlike polytheistic pantheons where authority was shared. Over time, interpreters have understood these beings in different ways, some as angelic rulers of nations, others as rebellious spiritual powers who turned against God. The Bible affirms that while these spiritual beings exist, they remain under Yahweh's ultimate command, showing that monotheism in Israel was not the denial of spiritual realities, but the assertion of God's absolute sovereignty over them. Nephilim. The Nephilim are some of the most mysterious figures in Scripture, mentioned in Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 4 and Numbers chapter 13 verse 33. They are described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Many interpreters understand this as fallen angels taking human wives, producing a hybrid race of giants or mighty warriors. These beings are referred to as men of renown, legendary in their strength and violence. Their presence is tied to the great corruption of the earth before the flood, serving as one of the reasons God brought judgment on humanity in Noah's time. Later, when Israelite spies explored Canaan, they reported seeing Nephilim there and described themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. Whether understood literally as giants or symbolically as terrifying warriors, the Nephilim represented extraordinary human rebellion and the blurring of divine and human boundaries. Jewish traditions, such as the Book of Enoch, expanded on this story, portraying the Nephilim as corrupt offspring of angelic beings who taught humanity forbidden knowledge. In biblical theology, their existence highlights humanity's descent into violence and sin, pointing to the need for divine judgment and cleansing through the flood. Queen of Heaven. The Queen of Heaven is directly referenced in Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 18 and chapter 44 verses 17 through 19. In these passages, the people of Judah, especially women, are described as baking cakes, burning incense, and pouring out drink offerings to her. They stubbornly claimed that their lives were prosperous when they honored her, and that disaster only came when they ceased her worship. Although the Bible does not identify her by name, most scholars believe the Queen of Heaven was a title for Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, or for Astarte, the Canaanite goddess of fertility and war. Both were widely revered in the ancient Near East as mother goddesses linked with the stars, moon, and the cycles of life. For the prophets, worshipping the Queen of Heaven was a direct act of rebellion against Yahweh. It symbolized Judah's rejection of the covenant in favor of pagan practices. Jeremiah warned that this devotion would bring judgment on Jerusalem, and indeed the city later fell to Babylon. The Queen of Heaven thus stands as a sobering example of idolatry deeply embedded in culture, alluring in its promise of prosperity but leading to destruction under God's wrath. Tammuz. Tammuz was a Mesopotamian fertility god closely associated with the yearly cycles of vegetation, death, and rebirth. His myth described him as a youthful god who died each year, symbolizing the withering of crops in the dry season, and then returned to life with the rains, bringing renewal and fertility to the land. In Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 14, the prophet sees women at the very temple in Jerusalem weeping for Tammuz. This ritual mourning was part of the annual commemoration of his death, in which worshippers grieved for him in order to ensure his return and the renewal of the land. This practice was deeply offensive in the eyes of Yahweh, for it brought pagan fertility rites, often tied to immorality and ritual prostitution, directly into the temple precincts. By participating in the mourning of Tammuz, the people of Israel showed how foreign worship had blended with their faith, twisting even natural cycles of life into acts of rebellion against God. Tammuz therefore represented more than a fertility myth. He stood as a stark example of how cultural practices, when uncritically absorbed, can corrupt and replace true devotion to Yahweh. Nisroch. Nisroch is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 37 and Isaiah chapter 37 verse 38 as the god of the Assyrians worshipped by King Sennacherib. After Sennacherib's humiliating defeat at the hand of the Lord, he returned to his land. While worshipping Nisroch in his temple, Sennacherib was assassinated by his own sons, who struck him down in the very place where he sought protection. Although little is known archaeologically about Nisroch, many scholars suggest he may have been a corrupted form of Ninurta, a Mesopotamian god of agriculture, war, and hunting. Regardless of his precise identity, the biblical narrative places Nisroch's temple at the center of Assyria's downfall. The most powerful king of his time, who boasted against the God of Israel, was struck down while bowing before his false deity. This account highlights Yahweh's absolute supremacy over Assyria's national god and shows that no idol can save its worshipper from the judgment of the living God. Rimmon. Rimmon was the Syrian god of storms, rain, and fertility, mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 18. After Naaman, the Syrian commander, was healed of leprosy by the prophet Elisha, he pledged himself to the worship of Yahweh alone. Yet he expressed concern because, in his official duties, he would still be required to bow in the temple of Rimmon, while accompanying his master, the king of Syria. This reference reveals how deeply embedded Rimmon's worship was in Syrian political and cultural life. Scholars often identify Rimmon with Hadad, the West Semitic storm god widely revered in the region. As a storm deity, Rimmon was believed to bring rain and agricultural fertility, making him central to Syrian religion. Naaman's dilemma illustrates the tension many believers faced when living in societies dominated by idolatry, the conflict between exclusive devotion to Yahweh and the cultural pressures of honoring national gods. Merodach. Merodach, also called Marduk, was the supreme god of Babylon and the central figure in its religion. In Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 2, the prophet declares, "Bel is put to shame, Merodach is dismayed." This prophetic pronouncement announced the downfall of Babylon's greatest idol. Marduk was not only the chief god of Babylon, but was often identified with Bel, meaning Lord. He was revered as the creator, king of the gods, and patron of the city of Babylon. Marduk was celebrated in the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, as the deity who defeated the chaos monster Tiamat and established order in the cosmos. His temple, Esagila, stood as a monumental center of worship and symbolized Babylon's imperial strength. Yet despite his exalted status, the Bible declares his humiliation and the futility of his worship. When Babylon fell to Persia in the year 539 before Christ, the prophecy was fulfilled. Merodach serves as a reminder that even the greatest idols of empires collapse when confronted by the power of the true God. Succoth-Benoth, Nergal, Ashima, Nebaz, Tartak, Adramelech, and Anamelech. In 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 29 through 31, the Bible records how the Assyrians resettled foreign peoples into Samaria after the exile of the northern kingdom of Israel. Each group brought its own gods and established their worship in the land. The men of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth, the men of Cuth made Nergal, the men of Hamath made Ashima, the Avites made Nebaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites made Adramelech and Anamelech. The worship of Adramelech and Anamelech was especially horrific, as they demanded child sacrifice by fire. These names reflect a wide spectrum of Mesopotamian, Syrian, and other regional deities, each tied to particular cities and cultures. By introducing them into Samaria, the Assyrians ensured that idolatry spread further among the Israelites, corrupting their worship and deepening their departure from Yahweh. This passage highlights the destructive effect of foreign influence and syncretism, showing how idolatry became entrenched not only through Israel's own disobedience, but also through the imposition of pagan practices by conquering nations. Gad and many. In Isaiah chapter 65 verse 11, God rebukes the people of Judah who prepare a table for Gad and fill cups of mixed wine for many. Gad was a god of fortune, associated with good luck and prosperity, while many was a god of destiny or fate. Together, they represented the human desire to control or manipulate future outcomes by appealing to divine forces of chance. By turning to Gad and many, the people revealed that their trust had shifted away from Yahweh's providence and promises, and had instead been placed in idols of luck and fate. This practice symbolized a deep spiritual compromise. Rather than depending on the God who had covenanted with them, they sought blessing in powers that did not exist. The worship of Gad and many highlights how easily the human heart can place hope in chance, destiny, or superstition instead of in the sovereignty of God. What if the very thoughts you believe are yours were planted by someone else? The enemy's most dangerous tactics are the ones you don't even realize are happening. Watch every deadly strategy Satan uses against you explained in detail to uncover how he works and how to fight back. Don't miss it.